over there. I didn't see you come in. Well, as you can see, I'm having a look under the bonnet of the Mini in suitable attire, and everything under here is currently tickety-boo. But I suppose you're here wanting to know a little bit more about the classic Mini. And what can I say? I can't blame you, they're absolutely fantastic little cars. So, I decided to team up with Ian from Team Ballylough Classics, and together we've made a bit of a video explaining about the Mini, really. Ian's going to be looking at the commercial and estate side of things, so basically the longer wheelbase Minis, which you can check out his video in the description below or just up there. And with my video, I'm going to be looking at the Mini Saloon. So, as I said, everything's tickety-boo under here, so let's crack on and have a look at, don't forget to take this off, the Mini. The British Motor Corporation was a company formed in 1952 when two of the largest British car manufacturers, the Austin Motor Company and the Nuffield Organisation, producer of Morris, MG, Wolseley and Riley badged cars, agreed to merge together to fight the threat from overseas manufacturers and ensure the future of the British motor industry. Individually, these companies have been massively successful, and when they merged, the newly named BMC became the largest British car manufacturer of its day. A few years after BMC came into existence though, it had a large challenge to face when the Suez Crisis emerged. The Suez Canal was a valuable waterway controlling 2/3 of the oil consumed by Europe. It is located in Egypt, and at the time it was owned primarily by the United Kingdom and France. So when in July of 1956, the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalised the canal, you can imagine how much it angered the British and the French. So, with aid from Israel, who needed very little provocation to attack its neighbour, the three countries set about an armed assault on Egypt to retake the canal. Israel struck first, with the United Kingdom and France joining several days later. The United Nations quickly called for a ceasefire. The Soviet Union were issuing threats about joining the conflict to support Egypt. The USA strongly warned the Soviet Union to stay out of the conflict, whilst also massively pressuring the British, French and Israeli governments to withdraw their troops and threatening the three countries with economic sanctions. Britain, France and Israel eventually withdrew their troops in late 1956 and early 1957, having not retaken the canal. By this point though, the damage was done, and an angry Saudi-led oil embargo quickly followed to punish the UK and France for their intervention in the area. As a result, fuel rationing was introduced across Britain, and motorists were allowed only 4 gallons of fuel per month. A demand then for more efficient and economical cars was born. The British public started turning to the cheap and economical bubble cars such as the German BMW Isetta and Messerschmitt Kabinenroller. Leonard Lord, the chairman of BMC, was appalled that the public had been put into a position where they had to drive around in these cheap, uncomfortable and unsafe micro vehicles. Although these microcars were super efficient, often able to achieve between 60 and 90 miles per gallon, they were also very unsafe, very noisy, and they could only seat 2 people. It was time then for Lord's company to create a proper miniature car that would be built in the same vein as Volkswagen's Beetle, Citroen's 2CV and Fiat's 500. He gave the brief to Anglo-Greek designer Alekis Agonis. He had to design and then have his team of assembled highly skilled engineers build a proper miniature car that could seat 4 people, with the proportions being 10 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. Passenger room had to be 6 foot or 80% of the overall length, and they had to use an existing engine. It was an immense challenge. It was designed on a napkin, and the size was refined using a floor, some chalk and some wooden chairs. You wouldn't see that in the modern car industry, would you? Space-saving technology was created by turning the engine 90 degrees so it's transverse instead of longitudinal, meaning that the car could be front-wheel drive, therefore meaning a driveshaft to the rear wheels was no longer required. Rubber cone suspension saved space over the traditional spring setup, and tiny 10-inch wheels were put in each corner. This meant you had lots of room in between for passengers and luggage. It met Lord's design brief perfectly, and when Lord drove the prototype car in 1957, it said that he ordered the team to build the bloody thing. It was launched to the public in 1959 as the Austin 7 and Morris Mini Minor, and despite BMC's confidence, sales were a little slow to pick up. Even by 1950 standards, it was small, and the public was struggling to believe it could be a proper functional 4-seater saloon. Early buyers discovered that it was easy to drive and had great handling, making for a fun driving experience. Before long, the good reviews added up to more sales, and in its first year of production, the Mini overtook the Morris Minor as BMC's best seller. In 1960, John Cooper of the Cooper Car Company and Cooper Formula One team saw huge potential in BMC's new small car, and approached Issigonis to create a sporty Mini. Though Issigonis was dismissive at first as he was a man who didn't like others meddling with his work, Cooper was able to share his vision for the Mini and convince Issigonis and BMC that a sporty Mini was a good idea. In 1961, the 55 horsepower Cooper was launched with an even sportier version, named the Cooper S, arriving in 1963. In Cooper and Cooper S guises, the Mini had many achievements in rallying, the largest being that the Mini took on the giants of the time and won the 1964, 65 and 67 Monte Carlo Rally, as well as having successes in circuit racing, and, because of its lightweight and superb handling, it was great at auto testing too. In the 1960s, the Mini became the car to be seen in, as celebrities made it their car of choice, and because of its low price, it was accessible for people who never owned a car before. The Mini had done something no other car had done in Britain before. It had broken down the class barrier, and in doing so, it had made its mark in automotive history. As the Mini was in production for 40 years, things changed over time as new technologies and production methods came into effect. Though it is disputed as to how many marks of Mini there were, for the purposes of this video, we're sticking to the general consensus of 7 marks. This is how you can identify them just by looks. Please note that the dates provided are to be used roughly to gauge the age of a Mini, as there is no specific cut-off date between the marks. The Mark I was around from 1959 to 1967. It had a rounded grille, sliding windows, external door hinges, a flip-down rear number plate so you can fit a little wicker picnic basket in the back and have it hanging out the back end of the car because, of course, the boots are not that big on them. It had rounded rear lights and a centre speedo. The Mark II was around from 1967 to 1970. It changed out the rounded front grille for a hexagonal shaped grille which went all the way to the end of production. It still kept the sliding windows of the Mark I and the external door hinges. However, for safety's sake, it added rectangular rear lights with brake and indicator bulbs only. This was added for safety because these bulbs and lenses were larger than the rounded ones on the Mark I. The Mark III lasted from 1970 till 1976. It came with larger doors. The external door hinges were replaced with internal door hinges. The wind-down windows replaced the sliding windows. The Mini also became its own sub-brand within British Leyland, as BMC changed to British Leyland in 1968. This was obviously instead of being called an Austin 7 or Morris Mini Minor. The suspension was also changed from hydroelastic to rubber cone to save money. Although that's not necessarily a visual aspect of the Mark III, it is obviously an important one in terms of the suspension setup and how it drives. The Mark IV, 1977 till 1984. It added a reversing light to the rear light cluster. It was also the last Mini to use an 850cc engine. Other than that, it was fairly similar to the Mark III. The Mark V, 1984 till 1991. Disc brakes were added to the front as standard with servo assist, along with 12-inch wheels for a better ride quality. These are said to be the best handling Minis because of less sidewall wobble when cornering. This was the last Mini to use a 998cc, and in 1988, the Mini became a brand in its own right after the Austin name was discontinued, though many of them will say in their logbook that they are a Rover Mini. In terms of looks, the Mark VI, 1991 to 96, was not that much different from the Mark V. Most of the changes were underneath the bonnet, so under the bonnet became fuel injection around roughly 1993 due to stricter emission regulations, and from this point on they were 1275cc only. The 1275 carried it through till the end of production. The Mark VII, the last of the run of the classic Mini, 1996 to the year 2000. These incorporated the more familiar now winged Mini badge. These are the sort of badges we see on the more modern BMW Minis. Sports pack variants had 13-inch wheels and larger wheel arches to obviously tuck these under, and a slightly different steering wrap because obviously larger and wider wheels meant turning circle was not obviously going to be as good as a 12-inch wheel Mini. Usually, these later Minis have a fuse box on the driver's side with spade fuses incorporated rather than the traditional cylindrical, And they have the windscreen washer bottle located in the boot because there was no longer any space underneath the bonnet. Safety was also improved. It's not necessarily visual, but it's important to note as things were done to make the Mini that little bit safer to carry the Classic through until the new BMW Mini would arrive. So safety sort of changed with the addition of an airbag to the steering wheel, and you also had some sidebar strength increased basically. The Wolseley Hornet and Riley Elf, 1961 till 1969. These were designed to be a more luxurious Mini with a more traditional 3-box design of engine bay, passenger compartment and luggage compartment. Basically it was supposed to be a mini Rolls Royce. These came with leather seats, a larger boot, more chromework, fancier wheel trims, and on Wolseley variants, a light up badge which I think personally is absolutely brilliant. The Riley was the sportier version of the two, but it was never really specified how it was sportier, as apart from badges, grille, a few other bits of trim, the Elf and Hornet were identical. Finally we move on to the Clubman, which lasted from 1969 until 1980 or 82 in certain other markets that weren't Britain. The Clubman came with a squarer front end which looks a little more like an Austin Maxi. Fun fact for you, it shares indicator units with a Maxi. It was designed to replace the Wolseley Hornet and Riley Elf as the more luxurious version in the Mini range. It had better crash structure due to the longer front end. It also had easier underbonnet access due to a larger bonnet and engine bay. However, for these plus points on it, there was a negative point in which that it was aerodynamically worse than the original 1959 design of car. Not really that much changed over the Clubman's lifespan. It lost engines and arguably was a better car to live with than the 1959 round nose design when put side by side, but it just never really had that same comparative aspect of cool Britannia that the round nose had, and so it was dropped in 1980. So you've heard the visual changes really between the different marques of Mini, but what's the difference then in the price of them if you're looking to buy one now in 2020 or even 2021, which, yeah, not too distant in the future from this point in time of filming. So let's start then, the Mark 1. Really you're looking about £3,000 for a full restoration job on one of those, and those can go up to £70,000 for a fully immaculate Cooper S. So it's quite a lot of money at the end of the day for a Mark 1, but there's not many of them around because of course the Mini was an everyday car at this point. It was likely to be scrapped and things like that, so not that many of them survived comparatively. Mark 2, you're looking about £2,800 for a full restoration project with £45,000 for a Cooper S. Mark 3, £2,500 full resto, £45,000 Cooper S, so somewhere in that bracket. Mark 4, £1,700 to about £20,000. Mark 5 and 6 roughly the same because not that much really changed between them, but you're looking somewhere between £800 for a full restoration project and about £9,000 for a fully, good one. Mark 7, which is Sports Pack and Cooper only at this point because they no longer had standard sort of cities and sprites and things like that. You're looking probably around £2,300 to £25,000 depending on condition. Clubman, £1,500 to £29,000, and a Hornet or Elf if you can actually find one because they're extremely rare to find. £3,500 to £25,000. So not all of these prices are going to be exact because every circumstance with the Mini is different, every condition, things like that, but as a rough idea of what you can look to pay for one, yeah, this is what you can expect. With the Mini, you obviously have to take into consideration the everyday costs of owning one. So, as well as obviously your costs of maintenance and tyres and things like that, obviously you've got to take into account that at least in the UK, you've got the cost of tax, insurance, those kind of things. So, let's start off with that then. Tax. This year, 2020, I paid £165 to tax this car for the full year. Insurance, not going to say the exact amount, but I will say it was somewhere around £200. At the time of renewal, I was 23 years old, and on this particular car, I had a year's no claims bonus to use on that. So that gives you a rough idea of how much it costs. Because it's a classic car insurance tends to be a lot cheaper than sort of your everyday car insurance. So just bear that in mind when you are looking to obviously insure your classic Mini. Another consideration with the Mini then is of course the cost of your fuel. Now I can't exactly say how much I've spent over the last year of ownership with this car because I honestly just didn't keep track of how much I was spending on fuel, but to put it lightly, so this can maybe help you sort of work out how much you might be spending on fuel, because of course everybody's uses of a Mini are quite different. So some use them daily, some use them only to go to one show that's only 2 miles down the road sort of thing. But to put it this way, depending on where you live in the UK, filling up a tank of fuel on a Mini has cost me somewhere between £22 and £26. So just bear that in mind when you're filling up your Mini and bearing in mind your cost considerations. Let's have a look under the bonnet now and I'll show you some of the servicing items and how easily accessible they are, and if they're not too easily accessible just from looking in through the bonnet, how accessible they can be if you maybe remove a couple of things and get them out of the way kind of thing. So let's have a look underneath the bonnet then. So with a classic Mini then, you might decide you want to do servicing yourself on these cars, and that's great if you do. But you might want to know where the things are under the bonnet and how easily accessible they are. So with this then, you got your washer bottle just located down there, which pop up top like that, fill up, you get the picture, you know how to fill up a washer bottle I hope. Down here, I've got a little weather screen, water screen, whatever you want to call them. Just undo those two little things. And then you got access to your spark plugs very easily. That there, that's your dipstick for the oil, which of course quite easily accessible. To top up the oil then, you just got this little cap on the top, comes off. I got Paddy Hopkirk one there, if I can actually get it back on. There we go, job's good. You have your little air filter located just inside this, and this comes off very easily. You just undo these two and little bolts and they just, it just pulls out, and that's very, very simple. You can get obviously different air filters for it, so you can get a K&N one, you can get sort of a snap papery one, things like that. You've got your little thermostat just located within that little housing down there, which of course can be very useful if you ever need to change a gasket or thermostat itself on your car, which I've had to in the past, so that's where you got some of the mucky markings on it, but anyhow, I never go for perfection as such. Alternator just located right down here at the front. Obviously you've got your radiator just here, all the hosing. This is electronic ignition on this car. This here is your brake fluid reservoir. As you can see, I've had to do a little bit of work to it just to make sure that all stays on because the wiring's all coming off. Right, air filter. Air filter? No, not air filter, we've done air filter. Oil filter. That is located right down there at the bottom of the engine. You probably can't see it from here. There's your horn. There it is. Oil filter just oil filter. Obviously when you change your oil in these cars, you want to change your oil filter as well. There is no specific easiest way of doing it because it's still quite a long drawn out process, but your oil filter is located just in there, just behind the grille. So the easiest thing to do would be to take the grille off the car, and then you've got all round good access for it as well. You'll have seen with me when I changed this hose here on the car earlier this year. The easiest way to get access to things like that is sometimes to take the grille off. It's a bit of a faff, but it is easily doable. Also, as well as that, you got your little drain plug for the radiator just down there somewhere. So that way then you can obviously drain all your coolant if you need to change it or do any work such as changing hoses or your radiator. Fuse box as well, just in case you need it. In earlier Minis, this is your fuse box. I know it's absolutely ridiculously small, as is everything else on the car, but that little cover just pulls off and there's all your fuses in there. In terms of servicing accessibility, that's it. The battery is located in the boot and that's very, very easy to get to as well. Down here you've also got your servo for the brakes, which being a Mark V, it comes with disc brakes on the front, which was another reason why I wanted a Mark V. You can get mods for earlier ones to have disc brakes, but when it comes with it, it's a lot easier. I'm going to put this on back when the camera's off. Yes, it does. I think the question with the Mini should be, where doesn't it rust more than where does it rust? Because, you know, the old, well, youngest versions of the Mini now are, yeah, they're about 20, 21 years old now. So, yeah, don't expect them to be immaculate because, of course, they are an old car. But as rough points as to where they rust, let me point them out to you. Down there, here, round here, down there, down in the boot floor, down there again. Sills. These here are the outer sills, but it's usually the inner sills that go. Also, the floors on the bonnet lip, around here, along here, the whole front end. To put it lightly, with my particular car here, the whole front end on this car has been replaced by a previous owner, hence why I've got the spare bonnet just over there. But yes, the whole front end on this car, and including the doors as well, have been replaced by the previous owner of this car. So they do rust, and that's because different levels of steel were used throughout production. So at the time when mine was produced in 1991, possibly built in 1990, who knows, the steel used at that point was not of a particularly good quality. So yeah, they rust everywhere basically. So, but the main ones really, I mean, parts are cheap in terms of getting a new front end and doors and things like that, but some of the ones you want to look for is underneath the car more than anything else, because that's where you're going to find the biggest issues. To put it lightly then, the Mini as a car, the oldest versions of these are 60 years old and the youngest being 20. Yeah. Don't expect them necessarily to come without any bits of rust at all, unless of course you're paying top dollar for an immaculate one somewhere. Modding your Mini is completely down to personal preference. If you want to keep it 100% original, then you keep it 100% original. If you want to modify it, you modify it. It's your car, you do what you want to do with it at the end of the day. Obviously you're going to get people out there who go, oh, you should have modified it, and oh, you should have kept it original, but at the end of the day, it's your car, you do what you want to do with your car. Wheels, door mirrors, front grille, headlamp peaks, fuel cap covers, rear lights. These can be changed out to the Mark II style if you really want to, but of course, just bear in mind, if you do that, you do need, of course, the reversing light, so you will still need one somewhere on the car. A boot tidy kit. I built this one up all myself, but of course you can buy kits over the internet. Seats can be changed really rather easily. I haven't done it. These are the standard seats on this Mini. Steering wheel, you can change them out for a nice wood rim one or a leather wheel, do whatever, you know. This one, you're going to see a video on how I put this on the car in a few weeks' time. Gear knob, same thing. That can be changed rather quickly and easily. You can add a stereo, whether that be in an original sort of stereo slot, aftermarket thing just there, or you can buy a proper custom one here, like I have. Speakers just down there. Exhaust. This one is stock. Here's what it sounds like. Here's a modified one. This particular one's a Maniflow exhaust. The particular one just shown was a Maniflow RC40 on Team Ballylough Classics Cooper S Traveller. Every owner of a Mini in the world will have a different perspective of which modifications or upgrades even are worthwhile doing to a Mini. Some will say, oh yes, adding different wheels to the car has really made a difference to the handling. I mean, I can say there's definitely a lot more grip, but that could just be the fact that I'm using tyres that were quite old and needed replacement when I bought the car. But then there are others which will say, oh no, those look hideous. Obviously I don't think they're hideous, so I chose them, but others will. But an upgrade, let's talk about some worthwhile ones, shall we? So let's start underneath the bonnet. Silicone hoses, I found these to be of excellent quality. They're also a little bit thicker than your standard rubber hoses. But yeah, with my experience of having rubber hoses that have failed whilst I've been driving the car, these do cost a little bit more than standard rubber hoses, but I just thought in the long run these are going to last probably a lot longer, so this is one of my worthwhile upgrades to the car. Next one would be, of course, the twin core radiator on this car. This is nice and cool, it's been sat up in here for a while now. But yeah, this allows you to have better cooling in your car, which means when you're running at higher speeds, so if you're doing say motorway journeys in this, bearing in mind this is a 998cc, yeah, this will help keep your car nice and cool for a long period of time. I also recommend having this little thing down here, electronic ignition. This wasn't fitted by me, this was done by the previous owners, and to be honest, I'm not upset that they did, because I would likely have done it anyway myself, because it means you have to mess around with points and keep sort of changing them every so often just to keep the car happy upon starting. So electronic ignition is a must in my mind. Having a weather shield as well, like I've got here, it's this transparent thing. This I think is also a must, because that way then it stops obviously rain getting through the grille and any panel gaps you may have anywhere, and obviously getting onto the electrics and stopping your car from working by shorting stuff out. So in my mind this is also a must. I know there's a lot of people out there who don't like these, but yeah, that's all personal opinions and preferences and things like that. As I said, every Mini is going to have an idea of what is essential and what isn't, but in my mind one of these is essential, because that way then it stops all the water from getting into your electrics. Bearing in mind the Mini is obviously a 60-year-old design, so although they will have done things over the history to try and improve things like that, there's only so much they can do, which is why one of these was added in the first place. Also, the last thing sort of under bonnet wise, probably adding a servo. Of course, people who want to keep their cars massively original, if you've got a 60s one or whatever, 70s, you know, which didn't have them standard, this obviously means you can press the brakes and you need to put less force, and it's just a lot easier to drive with basically than a Mini with, you know, non-servo assisted brakes. But also kind of to do with that, but not under the bonnet. Not sure if you guys can see too well under there, but disc brakes, those are a must, because they're just a lot more efficient than their drum counterparts, so those I definitely recommend. With this I am talking of course a lot more practically than obviously cosmetically, but it does add into the cosmetics. But the headlights on this originally were sealed beam headlight units, which meant when the bulb went you have to replace literally the whole unit. I went with the Lucas P700 style of lights here, which is, I believe it's a replica now, which obviously these ones are. But with these it means that you can just take the unit out and replace the bulb in it rather than having to change the whole unit. To put it lightly, a sealed beam unit costs roughly £15 plus. Of course you have to pay for shipping as well from Mini suppliers. So having that, which means you can just replace a bulb, you know, rather than the whole thing. Yeah, the outlay for these is a bit more than a sealed beam unit initially, but in my mind and experience it's just totally worth it. One other thing with these, it does mean actually that you can just replace the bulbs with the brighter ones, you know, so in these I got Philips extra bright ones, which means obviously better lights, better for seeing in the dark. It's been fantastic throughout the summer when going to shows and things like that and driving home late from them, so I would say that's an absolute win. Definitely not an essential upgrade to make to a Mini, but one that's possibly worthwhile depending on your uses. But adding a tow bar. I know people are going to hate me for this, but hear me out. The Mini, as we know, although it was practical in 1960s, it's not necessarily as practical now, although you could fit a weekly shop for two in there quite happily. But if you need just that little bit more space, if you have a little tow bar here, you can hook a trailer up and just tow a lot more, which of course is very, very useful indeed. Obviously if you've got the estate, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about that, but we're not talking about the estates too much in this video, that's for Ian's video. Just whilst we're around here at the back then, another upgrade I could recommend is having a boot tidy of any sort, whether you buy them from an online store or if you decide to make one yourself as I did, because that way then it's a lot kinder on the floor, which means you're not going to scratch it when you put stuff in there, which of course gets rid of the paint, which means you have to keep respraying that every so often. But yeah, it also means with this you've got a place to mount obviously an amplifier if you're into your music like I am. But it also keeps things looking rather nice and neat in there, so yeah, I can recommend having one of these as well as a worthwhile upgrade. An upgrade I can recommend for an old Mini is having comfy seats. These I've found are very comfortable anyway. These are the standard seats, so I'm not going to be changing these out anytime soon. I may get them clean though, because they are starting to look a little bit grubby, but in terms of comfort they're absolutely fine for my needs. But if you're using your Mini daily, I'd recommend maybe getting some of the later style Mini seats, which are a lot more comfortable than even these ones were. But if you can get them that recline and stuff like that, it's even better. That's obviously quite forward, but if you can get them that recline, it's a lot better and a lot comfier that way as well. Again, if you're into your music, having a radio or something like that can make a journey a lot more pleasant. Even if you're not into music, you know, having the radio on can sometimes make a journey a lot more pleasant. It's a lot more fun as well. But another upgrade I would suggest, have a little USB or 12 volt socket, because that way then if you're going somewhere new you can plug in a sat nav or whatever, because of course not many Minis are going to have these doubled in ones with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and things like that. So if you have a 12 volt socket, you can at least plug in a sat nav, and of course having one of these little USB things here means that you can plug in your phone on a long journey and keep that charged and use that as a sat nav if you really want to. There's one mod I haven't got in here which I might consider it of later date, but not right at this particular moment, because I quite like the raw experiences. If you want to create a slightly nicer journey to travel in a Mini, and I would recommend probably fitting sound deadening mats into the interior, because that way then the Mini is, put it lightly, it's not a very well sound insulated car at all. Sound reverberates everywhere in it, so if you're doing long journeys in a Mini quite frequently, you might want to yeah, get sound deadening mats for the car. But you know, I find it acceptable as it is, but not everyone is me, so there we go. As your Mini is obviously a classic now, parts on it will obviously wear out at some point, and of course that means you'll have to go out and buy a replacement part for it, or potentially, if you really want to, you can buy a modified part or an upgrade or whatever, because the options for Minis are completely and utterly endless. But the question is, where exactly can you get new parts for a Mini from today? Because of course, well, the Mini's been out of production for 20 years. Obviously, you're not going to have parts just stuck on a shelf like you maybe had back in the 70s, 80s, 60s, 90s, whatever. Well, despite the fact that it's been out of production now for about 20 years, there's actually still quite a large supply of parts for the Mini. I mean, you've got companies such as Mini Sport, Mini Spares, Huddersfield Mini Spares, Somerford Mini Spares. You've also got the Cooper Car Company, which provide upgraded items. You've also got Maniflow, who do exhaust and stage 1 kits. You have got Smithy's Bits, who provide blingy bits for your Mini, so you can spice up that engine and make it look really nice. But on the more mainstream front, at least in the UK, you've got places such as Euro Car Parts, Motor Parts Direct, and of course, probably the biggest one out here, Halfords. I will say with the more mainstream dealers is they likely won't have the parts on the shelf, and in most cases when you're buying a part from this more specialised Mini places, you will often have to wait a couple of days for shipping. But from my personal experience, I've found this has been roughly 2, 3, maybe 4 days most, which, you know, considering it's being shipped from the other end of the country to me, is not bad at all. I shall add on to that bit about the more specialised Mini part suppliers in that I shall say, although shipping is pretty good, you know, considering it's a classic car, the parts are still actually reasonably cheap and they're very, very much affordable. However, I would recommend if you're going to buy online, unless of course you're collecting in person, depending on where you live, I would fully recommend purchasing a lot of items all at once, because of course when you buy online, you of course have shipping costs. So if you have this tiny little mirror here and you're buying it from one of the online shops, I would recommend maybe going ahead and buying possibly a new set of front lamps or indicators or something like that to make your shipping costs fully worthwhile. Because of the way the Mini was so important to British motoring in the 60s, 70s, 80s and even potentially the 90s, if you ever get stuck when you're doing a job on your Mini, don't worry, because there are people out there who are willing to help you. One of the sites I can recommend to actually get a little bit of help from is the Mini Forum, because they've got a full range of people there who are incredibly knowledgeable in these cars. People who have done tuning, have done motorsports, or even just dailied them for 10, maybe even 20 or even longer years. So out there on the internet, there are people who are willing to help you. So I completely and utterly recommend joining the Mini Forum. I will say, when I went to Bristol last year for the International Mini Meet, the group I actually camped with there was the Mini Forum group, and they were all smashing people. I cannot recommend them enough. But also, depending on where you live in the world, if you're looking to get a Mini, if you're in the UK, there are clubs for Minis dotted around pretty much everywhere, and you are likely to find one that's pretty much within walking distance to your house. Warning, do not actually take this as walking distance, because some of them just aren't. The point is, wherever you live in the UK, there is not going to be a club that is too far away from you. If you don't live in the UK, fear not, because whatever country you live in, there is likely to be a club somewhere that you can join, whether it be a club that's online, that's more likely to be able to help you over the internet and text-based chats and things like that, or even potentially you could just watch a YouTube video on how to fix potential issues with their car, because there are thousands upon thousands of YouTube channels which are pretty much solely dedicated to the Mini, whether it be a 90s one, a 60s one, whatever. There's always going to be a Mini and a video out there which is going to help you as well. Oh, it's a lot of fun. Thing is, with a Mini, if you get a fairly stock one in quite a low sort of capacity of engine, whether it be an 850 or a 998, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to be going particularly quickly, really. Let's put it this way. The 998 Mini I've got here produces roughly around 40 horsepower, maybe a tiny bit more, maybe a tiny bit less, depending who built it on the day, I suppose, and configuration of the engine. But that's fine. Roughly 40 horsepower is all you need in a Mini, because they're so light. You just have your foot down everywhere and you're not going to break the speed limit. It's brilliant. Underneath the bonnet, you've got that little A series buzzing away like a nest of angry hornets. It makes you feel like you're going a lot faster than you actually are. Driving a Mini is incredibly hands-on. You don't have any power-assisted steering. It's all manual. You've got manual choke. You've got all your little switch gear down here. And of course, with a Mini, it's always likened to driving like a go-kart. Every single review you will see of a Mini will liken it to driving like a go-kart. I've been here trying to think of a different way of describing it so it's not sticking to that cliche, but it just does. The thing is, with a Mini, it's not a car that's built for the A roads or motorways really, or dual carriageways. Sure, it was built with those in mind as they were coming into their own in the 1960s. But really, the Mini was meant for sort of city use and the occasional trip on a motorway, which is why I brought it to a B road, because this is where the Mini really comes into its own. You can fit it into tiny gaps. Cars these days are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's nothing we can do to stop that because the safety regulations getting more and more stringent. But because the Mini is so small, you just fit it in any gap and you don't have to worry. But the Mini's greatest accolade, it's handling. For anybody who's a fan of Janspeed, the tuner company who works quite frequently on Minis back in the 70s and the 80s and even the 60s as well. This very hill featured in one of their advertisements for the company. This is Camp Hill near Salisbury. The Mini is not great at hills in stock form. In fact, it's quite slow. But I've driven up this hill a few times in the Mini now. Every single time.
it doesn't matter about the speed, it always puts a huge smile on my face. Got the handling second to none. Nothing I've driven so far drives, handles like a Mini. In fact, that was so fun going up there in the Mini. I'm going to go back down it. Cut the corners then, nothing's coming the other way. Obviously I wouldn't do that if there was someone coming the other way. I've mentioned the engine already in this particular segment of the video. The trusty old A series, developed back in sometime, I believe, in the 1940s. It's still going strong. Obviously this car was built in 1991. It's still a gem. It absolutely loves to be revved. There's not much torque, however, that being said, it is still reasonably torquey considering the car's body weight is so light, and of course, as I've already mentioned, there's not a lot of power. But again, the lightweightness of the body, you're going to have fun. No matter what engine you've got in a Mini, whether it be an 850, a 998, a 1275, 1293, 1380, or even a 1420cc, you're going to have a hell of a lot of fun in a Mini. The Mini also has a lot of history with the British public. Of course, everyone's got a story with one, whether it be you've owned one, family have owned one, friends have owned one. Pretty much everyone in Britain, at least, has got a story that involves the Mini. Some people, it was their very first car. And this particular Mini was the very first car I ever bought with my own money. The car I had before it, and at the same time as well, the car you've seen on the channel before, my Renault Megane. That I had as a hand-me-down, so I didn't actually pay any money for it. I did obviously have to pay for the insurance and the tax, but I didn't pay money for the car itself. The Mini was the very first car I bought with my own money. I can't say I could have chosen anything much better to spend money on. Because of the history the British public have with the Mini, everywhere you go in one, you'll often get people giving you thumbs up, often little nods of approval, waves, smiles. When you parked up, people often just flock over to the car and go, hello, oh, that's a nice car. It's a conversation starter. We've gone a little bit off topic with this section of the video, but I'm just having a lot of fun. Obviously, the Mini as a design is now 60 years old, 60 plus in the earliest Mini's cases. You can't expect the refinement of a modern car. Modern cars are quiet, very, very, very economical. They often, well, they also have a lot more safety than a Mini. But the thing is, you can't expect a Mini to have those because it wasn't designed to be that. The Mini was designed for a purpose, which we've already touched on in this video, and it met that design brief and that purpose perfectly. The thing is with the Mini, as with any classic car, you don't buy it with your head because financially they don't make sense. They rust, you have to get the rust repaired. Things will go wrong under the bonnet as components wear out. But you don't buy a Mini or a Classic with your head, no, because it doesn't make sense. You buy it because you love it. You buy it with your heart. And I think that's incredibly important when it comes to a Mini.
The Classic Mini then, what can we say about it? Well, it's still just as small, practical and frugal as it ever was, even back in the 1960s. It's also a very cheap and affordable classic car. So if you want to get into classic car ownership, I can recommend one of these because there are ample parts still available. Obviously there's plenty of suppliers out there, as we've already mentioned. Modding capability, modding is completely endless with these. You can go up to the moon if you want. If you really want to, you can change out the A series in here for something like a Vauxhall or Honda engine. But the thing is as well, the Mini, it's a conversation starter. No matter who you meet in the street, someone will often stop, turn around and go, hey, that's a nice car. The amount of compliments I had taking this Mini out on the road and doing some of the drive-by shots that you've seen in this film were completely and utterly lovely on the car. That's not something you get just out of your everyday car. When it was launched in 1959, the Mini was of course a masterpiece in packaging, The way that the engine had been turned around had never been done in a car of this size before. No, it was absolutely fantastic and even world-changing in terms of car technology. But the one thing that the Mini always had and still retains very much to this day is its sense of fun. And that, I think, speaks a lot for it. The fact that it actually has a character. A lot of modern cars roll off the production lines these days, come along to the forecourt, you buy them, drive them for a couple of years, and they go back and replace for another car. Usually the same one, especially if it's on a finance deal. But the Mini, it's not just a car, it's like a little dog. You absolutely love it. It goes around, it absolutely stinks. It's noisy, it barks at everything, but you absolutely love it for what it is, and it's absolutely fantastic for that. Because remember, there's one thing about the Mini. Before you leave this video, don't forget to check out Team Ballylough Classics video on the commercials and the traveller side of things, because he's looking very much into the Mini as much as I have with this. So don't forget to check out his video. It'll be over on his channel, link down in the description and probably up somewhere over here, if I got my hand right. If you have enjoyed this video, this mini guide as it were, please remember to consider leaving a big blue thumbs up, because it really helps me out and gets the channel and video noticed. Obviously, if you want to, please consider leaving a comment. Let me know what you thought of the channel, the Mini, things like that, because of course 2020 is now drawing to a close. And of course, if you want to see more car related content in the future, please remember to hit that big red subscribe button, because, well, why wouldn't you press a big red button? Who can resist a big red button? And of course, if you want to be notified every time a new video goes live, please consider pressing that bell notification. And that's it for me for now. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I shall see you in the very next video. Farewell for now.